What position of need is most important for the Denver Broncos to address in the first round this offseason? And should they be prepared to make a bold move to address that position? Plus, another special guest to help us continue our Mile High Milestones countdown, celebrating 30 years of Denver Sports 104.3 The Fan. All things to come on today's rundown, but we begin in the NFL, where mock draft season rolls on. The NFL never sleeps, and the war machine that is Roger Goodell in the National Football League will continue to churn out content all month and all offseason long before football kicks off again in the fall. And the latest mock draft that's catching eyes here in Broncos country comes from NFL draft analyst Chad Ryder, who put out a 4-round mock draft that features somewhat of a non-traditional element that we see with mock drafts, and that is trades being allowed. And that's important because in Chad Ryder's latest 4-round mock draft, he has the Broncos doing something pretty bold in the first round, and that is trading up with the Dallas Cowboys to move up from 20th overall to the number 12 overall pick, giving up the Broncos, giving up their first and second round pick in order to do so in exchange for pick number 12 and a 5th round pick compensation-wise coming back from the Cowboys. Now, right off the bat, I'm just going to say, that shopping cart feels a little light if the Broncos are going to move up 8 spots in the first round of the NFL draft. I don't have the Jimmy Johnson draft valuation chart in front of me to see what points line up with what in terms of value. But I just feel like when we see trades in the first round of teams ascending 5 or more picks, especially moving into the top 15 or flirting with the top 10 in the NFL draft, you're giving up not just significant draft capital in that year's draft, but dipping into the following year as well. So right off the bat, a little bit of an eyebrow raise for me, but let's play the game that Chad Ryder is laying out for us. So the Broncos move up from 20 to 12, and with that 12th overall selection, they select a name that was in the very early onset of this mock draft process, was the most commonly mocked name to the Broncos, and that is Tyler Warren, the standout tight end out of Penn State. We had kind of moved on as a local media and a local fan base, it feels like, from Tyler Warren, because it became pretty evident pretty quick that Tyler Warren wasn't going to fall out of the top 8, let alone the top 12, to be there for the Broncos to pick. But in Chad Ryder's mock, he does. The Jets actually go quarterback. I believe they take Jackson Dart from Ole Miss, who has been draft stock-wise really creeping up in the last month or so post-scouting combine. So they do not need a tight end. Tyler Warren falls to the Denver Broncos at 12, and they select him. So this is a 4-round mock. The Broncos gave up their 2nd-round pick, which means they're going to have 3 picks. But we'll go pick by pick here, and I want your guys' feedback in the comments below about what you think. How would you feel about Tyler Warren being selected by the Denver Broncos, knowing that in order to do so, they had to give up their 2nd-round pick in that year's draft, limiting the options that they have early in the draft to kind of build depth at other positions of need? Tyler Warren, in my opinion, is the top tight end in this draft class. And so on the surface, it is hard to criticize a team for taking what they perceive as a significant position of need, which I agree with, and then trading up to get the best player, the consensus best player available in that draft class at that position. On the surface, it feels tough to criticize that, but I'm always wary of drafting tight ends in the first round, for one, but just giving up assets in general, because despite what Chad Ryder and I know Cecil Lammy and others may believe, there is an element of dart throwing when it comes to the NFL draft. I won't use the dreaded C word, crapshoot, that I know irks a lot of people in the scouting and draft community, but it kind of is, to a certain degree, a little bit of a crapshoot. And with somebody like George Payton, who's been in the building for a number of years now and has proven that if given a decent quiver of darts to be able to throw, hits more often than he misses, especially in the early rounds. And some of the early round picks that we weren't so high on maybe in their first year or second year, like a Nick Bonito, are really starting to turn the tide there and change our opinion to where it's okay. He doesn't just hit on the slam dunk picks like Patrick Surtain in the top 15 of the NFL draft, because you're picking from the 15 best players in college football. Odds are you're going to do something that's worthy of recognition. So taking darts away from George Payton in order to address a position of need, which again, you address this position of need in free agency by bringing in Evan Ingram to be the latest iteration of your joker role if you're Sean Payton. And yes, the Evan Ingram thing, that may only be a 2-year experiment. We'll see. Evan Ingram's, trending on the wrong side of 30 for a tight end in the NFL, and we don't know what it looks like. I think even if Evan Ingram's 35, 36 playing in the NFL, he's probably more productive than what the Broncos have had at tight end, just given where he started from. But I thought the signing of Evan Ingram was to give you flexibility so that you didn't have to do something bold or desperate or drastic in the first round in order to address that position. You could let Tyler Warren go off the board and maybe take a Colston Loveland out of Michigan if he fell to you, or address that position in the middle rounds with like a Gunnar Helm, who the Broncos have spoken with, even though it was unofficially part of their top 30 visits. So I like the idea of being aggressive and bringing in a top name, but I just don't know that that's the best use of first round and second round draft capital for the Broncos because of the free agency moves that they've made. I think they gave themselves flexibility, and this feels like a move that someone who is inflexible or reaching would make, not a team that's ready to sit back and let things come to them and play the best positions available at each given round. That's my thought on it. I'm curious to get your thoughts. After Tyler Warren, the Broncos give up their 51st overall pick in the second round in order to make that trade to move up and get Warren. And in the third round, they pick somebody who, in my opinion, is destined to become a Denver Bronco, and I will tell you why. They end up choosing in Chad Ryder's mock draft with the 85th overall pick, Princely Umanmielen. Princely Umanmielen, an edge rusher out of Ole Miss. So SEC level competition. I personally don't know much, if anything, about Princely Umanmielen. It's the first time that I read his name in any sort of context, but I will tell you why I think he's destined to become a Denver Bronco. Because what are the Denver Broncos without a player whose name you just cannot pronounce? What are the Denver Broncos on offense or defense without a player that we are going to have to watch week in and week out have their name butchered by the likes of Steve Levy, who I love, and other broadcast crews around the country, following in the storied history of Michael O.J. Medea and Albert Okwuegbunam? So if you ask me, without knowing anything else about what Princely Umanmielen brings to the table as an edge rusher who would join as a depth piece to an already pretty talented room that you really can't have enough good pieces in, that alone moves his resume up above a decent amount in the stack as a Denver Broncos draft prospect for me. So you might be thinking to yourself, okay, we pick up a tight end in the first round, big splashy name. We don't have a pick in the second round. We pick up an edge rusher, not maybe the immediate position of need that you would say for the Denver Broncos, because they still have, depth concerns at wide receiver. You could probably use another corner to throw in the mix. Inside linebacker and safety, because the two free agency picks that they picked up in Dre Greenlaw and Talanoa Hufanga have had pretty significant injury concerns. And of course, the running back room, which was one of the most abysmal collection of performances over the course of a 17-game season that we've seen from a singular position with the Denver Broncos. Well, in the fourth round of Chad Ryder's 4-round mock draft that he put together, the NFL Network draft analyst Chad Ryder, he has them addressing with the 122nd overall pick in the fourth round, a name that many college football fans here in Colorado will remember, and that is Cam Scatterbo, the Heisman Trophy candidate running back out of Arizona State, selecting him in the fourth round. He profiled in college as somebody who, despite being maybe a little bit undersized at the position, had this like ferocious tenacity to the way that he ran, and he was a broken tackle machine, and he helped fuel Arizona State to a college football playoff bid an appearance after his team was ranked to finish dead last in that conference. So what a magical hero run that his team had, with him kind of being the driving force behind it. But there are legitimate concerns about Scadabo's transition to the NFL level and whether or not he, despite the success that he had in college, does he profile more like a generational prospect in an Ashton Genty or a physical style runner like Omari and Hampton? Or is he going to be the latest Toby Gerhart style runner who dazzled and flashed in college like Toby did at the University of Stanford before fizzling out relatively quickly in the NFL? Is Cam Scadabo, are you confident enough in Cam Scadabo, knowing that the Broncos, as of today, as of this show, have not addressed the running back position in free agency at all? There's no J.K. Dobbins. There was no signing of any kind of free agent back to help bolster or bring a presence to that room. So is Cam Scadabo, Jaleel McLaughlin, and Audric Estime, does that give you enough confidence with the Denver Broncos heading into the 2025 season that we are not going to be sitting here as we did Monday after Monday every week of last season, wondering if and when the Broncos were going to have any sort of palpitation of life in their run game? Because to me, I don't see it. I don't know that I walk into that. It could be wrong. I don't see that we walk into the season with Cam Scadabo being the figurehead of the Denver Broncos running back room, and suddenly that is going to be a force to be reckoned with in an AFC and an AFC West specifically, who is building up around the Broncos and creating stiffer competition right in their own backyard. Curious to get your thoughts. As always, please feel free to throw them into the comment section. But in the meantime, it is time to continue our Mile High Milestones countdown presented by your local Ford dealers. We have cracked the top 15. We are at number 14 on our way to number 1, starting from 30 of the 30 biggest Colorado sports storylines in the last 30 years, commemorating the 30th birthday, 30th anniversary of Denver Sports 104.3 The Fan. And we arrived today at one of my personal favorites on this list, and one that I'm sure, as we've seen in the past, is going to be contested by its slotting and ranking on this list, intentionally or otherwise. And that is the Colorado Avalanche Red Wings rivalry that spanned from the mid-90s to the early 2000s, with some of the best Colorado Avalanche teams ever assembled, and frankly, some of the best Detroit Red Wings teams ever assembled, clashing over and over again in the regular and postseason during that almost decade-long stretch. And to discuss this walk down memory lane with me, we bring in none other than the OG hockey guy himself, Mike Evans. Mike, you have been outspoken about this particular topic as it being one of your favorite rivalries, moments, storylines in maybe sports, not just Colorado sports. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, I'm very confident in saying that the Avalanche Red Wing rivalry is the best rivalry I have seen in sports, pro or college, in the last 30 years, easily. To me, it's got everything, whatever recipe you think you want to put together when it comes to defining what a great rivalry is. This rivalry had it all. First of all, you had high stakes competition. They were playing for the highest stakes possible, and that is a chance to go to the Stanley Cup Finals, win the Stanley Cup Finals. You had each team having their share of success, so it wasn't one-sided. You had genuine hatred and animosity and bloodshed that was a byproduct of this rivalry. You had amazing names. You had all-stars and future Hall of Famers dotting each roster. And so when you think about all the things that go into a great rivalry, I would submit Avalanche Red Wings against any rivalry in any sport over the last 30 years. I dare you to come up with one better.
No, I agree with you. And I think that something that kind of adds to the aura or the mystique of this rivalry as we look back nearly 2 decades after it had kind of taken its course was that it kind of erupted out of nowhere. I mean, leading into that 96 season when the Avs win the Cup, they just got to town. They're the new kids on the block, literally, in the NHL, transferring from Quebec City to Denver and all of the moves that came along with that. But the sneaky part about them coming to Denver, not as an expansion team. This was a team in Canada that was filled with stars, and then pulling off the trade for Patrick Waugh, and right out of the gate, them meeting during the 96 Cup run with the Red Wings being the prohibitive favorites to win that cup, amassing 131 points during that season, just a juggernaut of a well-oiled machine, and then having things start and spark right from there. Could you feel in that moment, could you have predicted, or did you predict back then when you were watching it, that starting with basically the Slava Kozlov hit on Adam Foote, where he kind of shoves his head into the old style of boards, not the singular glass panes that we have now, and the 20 stitches he received from that, did you see in that moment what was about to erupt?
I knew I was watching something unique right away, and I'll tell you why. Because at the time, I was living in Dallas, and I had no inkling that I was going to be coming here to Denver in the next couple of years. And just as a hockey fan living in Dallas at the time, with no real dog in the hunt, with the Avs or Red Wings, I was just instantly drawn into this matchup. And right from the start, it was just something that was electrifying, because the hockey was, I think so often you think about the Avalanche Red Wing rivalry, and it is the fights and it's the bloodshed, and I can't believe I shook his freaking hand. And what sometimes gets overlooked is the hockey was just unbelievable. And so not only were you watching world-class hockey played at the highest level by great, great players, then you added in all these other elements, and you couldn't help but just be sucked into what you were watching. And that was at a time when I wasn't even really connected to the Avalanche or Red Wing rivalry. Just as a hockey fan, it was like, this is amazing. And I'm in Dallas, which is not known as a huge hockey mecca at that point. And people around me, just sports fans, that's when you know you had something. When sports fans, not necessarily hockey fans, were drawn into this because they saw how unique this was.
Yeah, and I just think when you're looking at ingredients that you throw into the pot, when you're trying to stir up or concoct a sports rivalry, this just had so many little things. The Detroit Red Wings, historically speaking, were they were the pioneers, really, in embracing the influx of Russian talent from the KHL after the Cold War into their team. So that's why you got like the Fetisovs and the Kozlovs and just really storied players who many people in the U.S. hadn't heard about, but the impact was felt quickly because of the influx of talent that they kind of were the first tip of the spear to break into. So you had that, and you have this Colorado Avalanche team that's filled with young kind of up-and-coming talent. They're very close-knit, the Canadians, and it created almost this weird sense of good versus evil. Like the Red Wings seemed like an easy team to hate, and then you bring in this upstart, this young up-and-coming Colorado Avalanche team full of skilled young players who meld together, and you bring in the trade for Patrick Waugh, and suddenly the Avalanche go from like the cute little kid that just moved in next door to, oh, hang on a second, like this might be Mr. Steal Your Girl a little bit. Like this is a team that can compete and contend, and the personalities on each side that seemed to fuel this rivalry, it just felt perfectly packed together as like a powder keg waiting to explode. And you mentioned the infamous handshake post-game interview, and the man whose hand should or shouldn't have been shaken was kind of the front man, at least for the Colorado Avalanche, of this rivalry, and that was Claude Lemieux, who, if it didn't start the rivalry with his hit on Chris Draper, which becomes like the lasting moment or image from it, but that decision by Claude Lemieux, not that he needed much pushing most of the time, came in retaliation of Kozlov's hit on Adam Foote, and that kind of started the wheels turning. What was the discourse like? What do you remember most about the discourse after Lemieux's hit on Chris Draper, where he rearranged his face into the center of that board, and all of the fallout, which became a national whirlwind at that point afterwards?
Well, you have to remember that Claude Lemieux at that point had already established himself as one of those real hockey provocateurs, a guy who easily could get under the skin of opponents. The classic, you love him when he's on your team, you hate him when he's on some other team. And because he had already established that reputation as being a player that would go right up to the edge and over the edge and do so in a way that people felt wasn't always honorable, that there was some dirty tricks to the way that he would go about doing things. He was, in many respects, the perfect guy to launch this because he already had that reputation. If you were a player on the Red Wings or any other team, you were already aware of Lemieux and what he could do and what he could bring. And so it was almost like you were waiting for Lemieux to do something. And then when he did, it was like, okay, we got what we expected. Gloves are off. Here we go. So, yeah, he was in many respects the guy that took the match, threw it on the powder keg.
I think he's a fascinating case study when you look at sports. And you mentioned an element of him that I wanted to discuss a little bit, and that is if looking back on it, and I know you have, but for those of you that have, or you remember watching the E60, the unrivaled documentary E60 series that came out on this, which was phenomenal, by the way, he was described as the most hated man in hockey, but it was because he was an agitator, not necessarily an instigator. He wasn't always the first to drop the gloves and go after it, but he was the fly buzzing around your head when you're trying to go to sleep. He was the kid kicking the back of your seat on the airplane until you retaliated, and then it started things. And I just find that personality so interesting because it's not like Claude Lemieux was like a goon. He wasn't just some, third line player that you threw in there when you needed to muck something up. This was a Conn Smythe Trophy winner before coming to the Avalanche. He was a premier talent in the NHL, and he had this other side to him. And I sometimes wonder, where do we draw the line as sports fans and as a society where in terms of where we label these things? Because the same attributes that you see from like a Claude Lemieux, you see from like a Draymond Green, who's a multi-time NBA champion and a part of a Warriors dynasty that will be remembered as one of the greatest ever. And Bill Romanowski, who has a local tie here. And we have this weird dichotomy where we as fans, we embrace the nature of a gladiator sport, and we love the violence, and we love the elevated nature that it takes mentally to get to that point. And we celebrate the greatest of those sports, the Michael Jordans, the Tom Brady's, who are clearly wired differently than you and I mentally. And I think Claude Lemieux and Draymond Green and Romanowski, although maybe not reaching the annals of those, previously mentioned guys, they have a different wiring. And it's like, where do we decide who's the most hated man in hockey and who's kind of like a key piece to a team in an area that they need?
Well, those guys you mentioned, what makes them fascinating characters and necessary characters in what we love about sports is there's an interest in the fact that, wow, you're a great player or a really good player on your own merit. What is part of you? Why makes you wired in a way that you decide that in addition to being a really good player, you decide you also want to be that player that just sort of, pokes the bear type thing? What is it about your competitive nature that you're clearly an amazing competitor and you show that just in the traditional ways of competing, but yet you also have this part of you that likes to provoke and likes to wedge drive and likes to needle and likes to try to get under people's skin? I think in many respects, it makes them some of the more fascinating people we've ever watched in sports because their talent stands on their own, their competitiveness stands on their own, but yet they also have that other element that's mixed in that you so rarely see. And so that's what makes the Draymond Greens, the Bill Romanowskis, the Claude Lemieux, some of the more fascinating people in all of sports.
I'm going to ask with my tongue only gently planted into my cheek and ask you, Mike, that we watched during the COVID pandemic, we watched the release of the Last Dance documentary with Michael Jordan, where we got to see in depth from the man himself and those around him, the way that Michael Jordan would go out of his way to manufacture chips on his shoulder and would look for little edges and little cracks and chinks in the armor that he could stick his spear through in order to break you mentally in addition to, how it played out on the court. And so I guess I asked Mike, knowing that when we see it with Michael Jordan and how it's almost like celebrated as part of his aura and his legacy and what made him, the GOAT of the NBA in most people's eyes, why then do we turn to a Claude Lemieux, who's the son of truck drivers who grew up poor and hungry and develops this insatiable desire to be the best and to win no matter the cost? What is Claude Lemieux just misunderstood? Is he just one of Colorado sports' like miscast villains?
No, he's not misunderstood. No.
I said planted slightly in the cheek.
Well, go firmly in cheek, because Michael Jordan, he did all that, and all the while still came across as just a stone cold killer, right? When he was out there, like, he was looking to rip your heart out as a competitor. I think what works against Claude and what doesn't make him misunderstood
playing Bambi in the bush
is that he made it quite clear what he was trying to do out there. And I think what frustrated people about it was, man, you're willing to provoke, you're willing to try to get under people's skin, but then when they want to turn around and do something about it, and they want you to stand up and like, all right, you want to, and then you're like, whoa, hey, no, I'm not. It's like he lights the match, and then he's like scampers away while somebody else has to put out the fire for him. And that is what I think drove a lot of people crazy about Claude Lemieux. But it's an effective style, and those players, I think that every great hockey team, we're talking about hockey, has that player who has that ability to get under people's skin. When the Avs won the Cup a couple years ago, come on, Nazem Kadri was that kind of guy. And Nazem Kadri was a terrific player as well, but a terrific player.
Oh, yeah.
And Claude Lemieux was the same way. And it's what makes Claude Lemieux, as you look back on the Avalanche-Red Wing rivalry, as one of the more fascinating people in this rivalry, because he could be that real pain in the butt. He could be that instigator. He could be somebody that the opposing side would say, man, he plays kind of cowardly in what he does. But at the end of the day, he was still a really good player. And just again, one of those special characters that made Avalanche Red Wings so unique.
In life, Mike, it's my opinion that it is our human nature that we have to assess and assign winners and losers to things in life. It is just part of how we rationalize the world around us. So when you look back at the Avalanche Red Wings rivalry, the Red Wings, if I'm not mistaken, if memory serves, won 3 Stanley Cups during that 96 to 2002. The Avs won 2. But in the times where they met, the Avalanche held the head-to-head advantage in the postseason en route to those cups. So it's kind of like the Tom Brady has more rings, but Peyton Manning has a winning record in AFC championships kind of situation. So when you look back on the rivalry in mass, who won the Avs-Red Wings rivalry?
Oh, wow. I guess I'm going to finish by saying why this was the best rivalry of the last 30 years, by saying I think what makes it the best rivalry of the last 30 years, I don't feel like there was a definitive winner. I'm not trying to dodge your question. I just don't feel like, I suppose the hockey world would look at it and probably say slight edge to the Red Wings. And so probably the hockey guy in me would probably acknowledge slight edge to the Red Wings.
I'll dodge my own question with a definitive answer, and I do think there's a definitive answer, and that is that we won. The fans.
Absolutely.
We, the fans, whether
100%.
you're Avalanche fans, Red Wing fans, or hockey fans in general, we won as a result of this rivalry. And I guess on the way out, Mike, my question to you would be, why don't we have rivalries like this anymore? Why don't we see the passion, the intensity, the ferocity between two sports teams that just genuinely hate each other? What happened to the sports hate?
I think it's still potentially out there, but it's a rare mix to stumble upon. It really is. I think what ultimately has to happen is you have to have two great teams playing for high stakes. And from that, you have a chance for all those other emotions to bubble over. It has to be high stakes involved between two teams. And I think in order for it to work, it has to be high stakes, two great teams, and each team having had a chance to taste success. and then you start measuring everything you're trying to do against that other team. And I think once you get that in place, that's the baseline. Once you get that in place, now the other parts of the rivalry can grow from that. But I think if you're looking at any sport, any rivalry, it's got to be two great teams butting heads more than once, each team having success. And as they continue to square off, all that other stuff boils over.
It may never reach the levels of the Avalanche and the Red Wings during that mid-90s to early 2000s run that we've been discussing today. But if you had to guess, and maybe there's some wishful thinking involved in it, but for you, Mike Evans, if you had to guess what the next Colorado professional sports rivalry would be from this day forward into, however far in the future you want to go, what do you think has the best chance of emerging as that predecessor?
Well, I think Avalanche Stars probably has the best bet.
I agree.
But the only problem with that, though, Richie, is that they're going to be playing in the first round. And so, yes, the stakes are going to be high because I feel confident in saying that whatever team wins that playoff series this year is going to go to the Stanley Cup Finals.
Which is how it was for the Avs and the Wings.
Correct. But they were meeting later in the playoffs.
So it has to. So if the Stars and the Avs were meeting in the second round,
third round, that's the best because now you really are getting to the point where it's clear that whoever wins this is going to be going on to probably play in the Stanley Cup Finals. But first round takes some of the starch out of that, I think. But make no mistake, some of the elements are there because you're two familiar teams. The Duchesne and Rantanen thing plays a huge role in it. So I think that there are some of those ingredients there that I can notice right away. Nuggets, maybe the Timberwolves. Honestly, I don't see what the Lakers
looking like a rivalry right now. One seems significantly in the other's head.
Lakers maybe, but the Lakers are going to have to beat the Nuggets in the playoffs in order for that to happen, right? Yeah. Exactly. Broncos, we can only hope. Broncos, Chiefs.
Yeah.
Something like that. But no, I think if I had to say right now, the best chance would probably be Avs Stars.
Well, I'll tell you this. Over the course of this Mikko Rantanen saga that we've experienced, dating back to mid-January, when they made that move, I feel like there has been a significant shift in my mind and maybe my heart as it relates to Mikko Rantanen and the rooting interest that I have, because we all acknowledge the business element of sports. And your favorite player sometimes gets traded. Not everybody can finish their career in the same place where they started it, and yada yada yada. But I do feel like with the way it unfolded in Carolina, the way that they had to move him again, and then there was the conversation about like I won't even entertain the conversation with the Los Angeles Kings, and I'm coming to Dallas, and the money's not that difference, and when you're having to parse it to the level of state income tax differences and all that, I think in my own mind and heart, I won't actively say that I'm like aggressively rooting against Mikko, but I don't know that I'm really like pulling for him or rooting for him anymore. Whereas I might have if he had just stayed in Carolina. So there's a part of me that says, well, if I'm already detaching myself to indifference as it relates to Mikko Rantanen, maybe I could talk myself into, hey, I kind of just hope he becomes the villain and we can reignite something like that with a conference opponent, somebody that has such a familiar face, whose jersey should hang in the rafters of Ball Arena one day, in my opinion, and all of that. Maybe I'm talking myself into that could be kind of fun.
Well, let's hope that we do not have to test that theory of what we would feel about Mikko if Dallas beat the Avs. Would we continue to root for Mikko moving forward? Let's not go down that road. Okay. Let's not do that. I'm kind of with you. It feels comfortable putting Mikko kind of into a villain role right now. Let's leave him there for a while.
Love it. Mike, thank you so much.
He can ask Matt Duchesne for advice.
There we go. Mike, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate the insight that you provide. And as we are celebrating 30 years of Denver Sports 104.3 The Fan, as our 30th anniversary, 30th birthday was earlier this month. There are few people who are better suited to reflect back on the 30 biggest storylines since the birth of the fan than you, as someone who's been here for nearly all of those 30 years. And it's just on a personal note, in a personal level, I think that you are a fixture in this community and of the sports landscape that we have here. And I know that I personally am thankful to have you here to help us kind of navigate the next 30.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And like I did the last time I was here, James Merilatt, what are we doing?
It wouldn't be a sign-off without a James Merilatt
what are we doing?
rabbit punch.
14. It's got to be higher than 14. We got to talk.
Well, we will have plenty of opportunity to talk about it over the next 13 weekdays, where we will continue our trek toward number one. Mike, thank you so much for joining me. The rest of you out there, have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, and I will catch you at the same time in the same place tomorrow.
I do what I love what I do. Second nature to put in the work.